Hey guys, welcome to this video series called 5 Excel hacks that you need to know. So if you are wondering why exactly we are looking at Excel hacks, so if you look at the data migration concept, you would be pretty much using your Excel sheet. So there are a couple of things that you need to know so that the time and effort that you put in to prepare your data would be less. You would be becoming pro in terms of doing the data migration. We have picked up 5 such things that you need to know so that your data migration would be smooth and you will be working like a pro. So without any delay, let's get started. So the tricks and tips that we'll be discussing here can also be applied for other things like code migration. The first tip that we'll be learning today is trim. Trim as a function in Excel sheet basically helps us remove the extra space. So if you ask me why exactly we are learning this trim function is because, so let's say a pick list value is marked as restrict pick list values to the value set that is defined. So what does that mean is any value outside of the list of pick list values that are being defined in that pick list value, anything that you give apart from that would be thrown as an error. What error you would be seeing? You would be seeing a bad pick list value error. So this is the common error that you see if you are missing out any value or if you are providing an extra value that is not been defined in your pick list values. This option can be seen from your pick list field. If you look at the pick list field, you will be seeing this restrict pick list value for the value defined. So if you are not providing any value that is defined here, you would be seeing such errors. Now, if there are some spaces here and there on your data that you are preparing or in the Excel sheet, so that is where there are high chances that you would be seeing this error also. Now, what to do? So in such cases, we can use an option called trim. So if there is a extra space and the value that you wanted to provide and an extra space here, this extra space can be at the end or at the start. This trim option, what it does is it basically removes that extra space and gives you the text that you have defined here. So whatever the text that you have defined, it would remove that extra space at the start, at the end. So that is the use of your trim option. So make sure that whenever there is a pick list value that is marked as restrict pick list values, restrict the values that is defined in the value set. Make sure that you are also trimming the information so that way you do not end up entering any information with extra spaces. With the leading spaces or a trailing spaces, use trim option to remove them. Right. So we have taken example for a pick list value. It applies for other information also. If you think that the column has any leading spaces or trailing spaces, make sure that you use this option called trim. So let's quickly take a look at how exactly we can use a trim option in our Excel sheet. So here is my Excel sheet where in which I have this column called language. If you see this column D clearly, you see there are some extra spaces at the start. Here is an example for that. And one more example is here. So here is an leading space. And if I look at any value here, I can see a trailing space also. There is a trailing space just after this English. So what happens is if this is how the data has been sent, right? So we are also entering some leading spaces and trailing spaces for this particular column. How do I eliminate this extra spaces? You might be thinking, yes, why don't we go ahead and remove those spaces? We can make use of the backspace option to remove that space. But what if there is a trailing space and that we have not considered? So if you see here, this English has a trailing space. This is not being taken into consideration. So in such cases, what we need to do? That is where you can use a trim option. Trim option basically removes that extra spaces. So I'll go ahead and create a column called languages. I'll put a trim in the bracket just for our understanding. So I'll go ahead and write down the column names. That way it would be easier for us to understand. So how exactly we can use the trim option? Put a equal to sign, write trim. You will be getting a suggestion. Click on it. And what you need to pass is you need to pass the text information. Where is my text information? This is the column or this is the cell where I want to pass that information from, right? Even though I'm selecting an empty cell here, what I would be using is I'd be using an option called drag option. So that way this formula applies for all the cells that I have in my column H, right? So once done, close that function and hit enter. Since there is nothing, you would not be seeing any value here. If I apply this formula for all the cells under H column, that is where you will see the changes happening. So if you see here, any extra spaces that are there in this column D, which is like D10 has an extra space that has been removed, right? So now, what should we do after applying this formula? If I go to this particular cell, still I am seeing a formula here, which I do not want. I want to convert that into a value. Instead of putting it as a formula, I want to convert it to a value. So what I would do is I'll select this column, copy this and paste it as value. So what it would do is instead of showing it as a formula, now it converts it as a value. So what this option does is it basically gives us the value for the formula that we have written, right? So this is how you can make use of your trim option. Can we not do it manually? Why do we need to use a function here? The answer is very simple. Let's say if the number of records that are there in this Excel sheet is too large, right? So we might look at few records and do this option, but we might miss out on other records. So that is where writing a function would basically helps us remove such manual miss, and it would basically help us get the correct data here. So if you see here, there are no trailing spaces or any leading spaces here. So this is how you can make sure that your data is properly trimmed. So that is how you can make use of your trim option. Use this trim option to remove the leading and trailing spaces for a given column. So if the data is coming from an external system, there might be some kind of a leading spaces or a trailing spaces from that system. So it is on us to basically clean this data before we present it or before we load it into Salesforce. This is function number 1, which is trim. We have our second contender in this list, which is nothing but our concat function. Again, it's a function. So that means we would be writing a formula to get the results. So when do we use concatenator function is, it allows us to join 2 or more strings together. So let's say if there is a data prep that you need to do, where you need to combine text1 plus text2 plus text3. At the end, we want it to be displayed like this, right? So we wanted to concatenate the 3 texts that we have. So let's say text1 is in one column, text2 is in another column, text3 is in another column. So we wanted to prepare a column in a way that it should basically have a value which is a appending of text1, text2, and text3. How do you do that? With the help of your concatenator function. The syntax of your concatenator basically goes like this. You would put an equal to sign indicating that you're writing a formula to Excel sheet. Write concat, put a small bracket, pass the first text, second text, and you can keep on adding those values. And once done, close the small bracket and hit enter. That is where you can let the Excel sheet know that you have done with your formula, and it would start evaluating the formula and it give you the result. So that is how you can make use of your concatenate function. Let's quickly take a look at a simple example to help us understand the implementation of this concatenated operator. Let's say I have a list of users that I've got from the org. So for example, I've taken 10 users names here. So what I want is, so let's say I have got this data from production. So the users would be like this: username @thatdomain.com to basically indicate that these are the users created from that particular org. When you go to sandbox, you wanted a different username, so that way it would be easier for the people to understand that they are logging into a sandbox. Now, how do you differentiate these users from the production in the sandbox? Our best practice is to append the sandbox name to the username. So if the username in production is this, you append dot the sandbox name. So example could be like this: if my user in production is with name test123@test.com, a best practice is to append dot and write the sandbox name. Let's say if I'm creating a users in my dev sandbox, so that is where you can add .dev to it, right? So that is a best practice to do so. So this way, they would be having a separate username for your developer org and they would be having a separate user for production. So there would be a clear-cut difference between the username that they're using. If they're logging into dev, they will be using this username. If they're logging into production, they'll be using a username which doesn't have dot. If I have this list from the production, and if I have to do that data migration to the sandbox, so let's say I have to create the users in my sandbox, I cannot directly use this names. What I need to do, I need to use a .dev to this list that I have. Now, how do I go about this one? You might be thinking that, can I not use this option called replace? I would take this .com because that is common for all the usernames and replace it with .com.dev. So what I would do, I'd use an option to replace com with com.dev. So if I use that option, my job would be done. So let's say I can quickly make use of this option called replace. I've used Control F on my keyboard. Search option or find and replace option would open. So I'll click on replace and I'll use com here. And then I want the system to replace all the com references with com.dev. This is one option, right? If I click on replace all, this is how you can do it. So if you see here, earlier it was test123@test.com. Now it became com.dev, right? So this is one way to do it. Now, what is the problem with this one? So let's say for some reason, one of the user has com in their username for some reason. If I use that same replace option, what would happen? If I do this again, and if I click on replace all, wherever there is a com references in my username, that also got changed. If you see here, it became from com to com.dev. So this is something that we do not need. That means when you are using a replace option, make sure that you're not making this mistake. So what is the best way to do it? So that is where you can use your concatenate function. So there is no harm in doing it using a replace option, but you have to be double sure that you are not having such references which would be overwritten just because of the replace option that we're using. Now, how do I go about this one? So I can use this option called is equals concatenate. Now, once you write this one, Excel sheet would give you an understanding of how to use it, right? You can also use the help option. So help option basically tells you, like, if you can pass the text two that you want to concatenate to this concatenate function, right? So what is that I wanted to concatenate? I want to concatenate this username with the .dev. So how am I passing the text information? I'm using double quotes. I'm writing dev because that is what I want the system to append to this value. So this is my original value. I want the system to append .dev to it. So once done, so I do not want anything else, I'm closing it. If you have another text that you want to append, so simply put a comma and enter it. So let's say I would add it as test here. So what would happen? System would concatenate .dev test to this value that we have. Right? Since that is not my ask here, so I'll simply remove it and hit enter. If you see here, this value is being replaced with test123@test.com.dev. So that is how it would be done. So drag and drop this formula to all the cells so that it would be populated everywhere. If you see this cell 8, A8, test127com@test.com is still as this. Just at the end, it is appended with .dev, right? So again, if you're happy with your formula, copy the entire column and replace it with a value. Why we are doing it? Because we do not want the formula to be sent to the Salesforce. We want the actual value of this formula to be sent to Salesforce. So this is how we can make use of your concatenate operator. Now the third contender in our hacks list is check the duplicate value. So this functions or the shortcuts or the tips and tricks that we are sharing with you is more specific to Salesforce on how exactly we can make use of our Excel sheet to do the work that we do to prepare data, right? So there could be so many other tips and tricks that we would like to share, but these are the common things that we feel that would be useful in case if you are doing a data prep or data migration activity. Let's understand the need of this check duplicate values. So let's say if you are getting an extract from an external system could be any system. In that file, they would be giving you in the format of a CSV file, or they might give you a Excel file. What we wanted to do here is we wanted to identify the duplicate values. This Excel file might have some duplicate values. So before proceeding with this one, let's say if I wanted to identify or check if there are any duplicate values in a particular column. So in a given column, I wanted to check if there is any duplicate values. So how do you identify the duplicate values? So that is where you can use this option called duplicate values, which would help you understand what are the duplicate values that we have in a given column. Right? If the value has been repeated twice, that is what we call it as a duplicate value. And using this option, we can clearly highlight those cells which are having the duplicate values so that you can look at them and understand if there is a need for removing them or if there is any activity that you need to proceed if there are any such duplicate values. An example, say if a text field is marked as a unique field, that means it would only take the unique values into that particular field. If my Excel sheet is having duplicate values, if I send that data to the Salesforce org, that is where I would get an error saying that a duplicate value has been entered. So how do we eliminate that issue? So first check the column to see if there are any duplicate values. If yes, act accordingly. If there are no duplicate values, you can go ahead and upload that value, upload that sheet. So that is how you can eliminate this problem. So let's go ahead and see how to make use of this duplicate values. So if you look at this column E, data is related to song. So this is a name column that we are using to store the name of a song. If you see this song column, we wanted to make sure that this name of the song is unique. Yes, there could be covers that the users might be creating, but we wanted to make sure that we can refer to the song with the help of their name or an identification so that way a user can identify the song with their singer name if they are creating a cover. So how do we identify if there are duplicates to this column or not? Clearly, if you see here, there is a song from Apex repeated twice, and there are like a couple of things that you see are having covers here, right? So how do we identify a duplicate values in this column? Select the column, go to the home tab, and if you see here, there is a conditional formatting. Click on it, and that is where if you select this option called highlight cell rules, and that is where you would be having an option saying that duplicate values. So just by using the UI, you can basically identify the duplicate records in a column. So click on it, and that is where system would highlight the duplicate columns. If there is a duplicate value, system would ask you to select the type of the color that it needs to populate for a duplicate value. So it is saying that I'll be populating a light red fill with a dark red text indicating that it's a duplicate value. I'm happy with it, so I'll click on OK. So if you see here, there is a clear-cut distinction of the records or the text values which are unique and the values which are duplicate. So that is how you can make use of your duplicate option from the conditional formatting, so that way you can identify the duplicate values. So how do you remove them, or how do you basically filter them? Just by using a simple option. You can use your filter, or a shortcut on your keyboard is Control-Shift-L. Select that column, use Control-Shift-L. That way you can apply a filter. Now what I want only those values which are marked as duplicate. So I'll use this filter by color, and I'll select the color that I've selected earlier, which is used for marking a record or a text value as duplicate. So I'll select this one. So that is where system would only show me the duplicate values that are there in it. So that way you can copy them and ask the business to look at this information to see what exactly we need to do, and we can act accordingly. So that is how you can make use of your duplicate option. The fourth tip that we have is vlookup. In case if you are using a data migration, or in case if you are preparing a data, vlookup is something that you would be using quite frequently. The reason why we would be using a vlookup is, let's say I have two records or two objects which are connected via a relationship. So let's say this is object 1, this is object 2, and object 2 is related to object 1 via lookup. That means object 2 has a field which is pointing to object 1 record. So this is how the setup in the OR is. So if I have to do a data loading, so if I'm creating a new records in both the objects, what is the first thing that I need to do? I need to load the object 1 data first. So first I need to insert this object 1 record. So let's say if there are 10 records, I should insert them first. Then I can go ahead and insert the object 2 records. While inserting this object 2 record, so let's say one of the record in object 2 says object 1 field is pointing to first record in my object 1. So the object 2 record basically has a name field, so that has some value, and under the object 1 field, it is pointing to the first record in my 10 records that I've created. Now, I cannot enter the text information and ask the system to basically search for that record, the first record, and replace the ID for that particular record. So that is something that we need to do manually if you are doing data migration. So how should this file be prepared? I'll have a name column. Under the object 1 field column, I need to replace it with the Salesforce ID. Instead of name of that object 1 record, I need to replace it with Salesforce ID. So where do we have this Salesforce ID? I have in this list of records that have been created. From there, I can get that ID and replace its value. So let's say if the name of the first record is, if I put it as first record is the name of the record 1, I need to go to the sheet, search for that first name, and get that ID there and replace it here. If you see here, there is a lot of manual activity that is there. 1, I need to copy this value. 2, go to this sheet, search for it. 3, get that ID and paste it in this place. So if there are like 100 records here, I need to do this activity 100 times to basically populate the values in this column. Now, if you ask me, is there any easier way to do it? Yes, there is. That is nothing but your vlookup. What is this vlookup stands for? Vlookup stands for vertical lookup, which basically does the option of searching and getting the ID corresponding to the value that we have searched for in another sheet. The syntax of your vlookup goes like this. What do you want to look up? Where do you want to look up for it? And the value that you wanted to populate, like if there is a 2 column that you're using or a single column. And then finally, if you want to use it as an exact match or an approximate match. Right, so let's go ahead and quickly do this vlookup and understand how it actually operates, and let's understand the syntax as well. So I'm again on my Excel sheet that I was referring to earlier. So I have a songs as a extract from my org, and I have another sheet called singers. So the singers is the parent record and the songs are the child records. So now what I want is, this is something, think of this sheet as a sheet that I've got after creating this record. Now what I want is, in my song sheet, I have this temporary singer column, which I wanted to replace it with the ID of that singer. So what I want is, for this singer 2, I want to go to the other sheet, which is singer, search for that singer 2. So whenever there is a match, so here is a match for it. I want to copy this ID, go back to my Excel sheet, which is song, and paste it here. So this is what I wanted to do. So if you see here, there is a lots of manual activity that we are doing. Now, if you ask me, how do I do it in the system, or how do I make use of the Excel functions to basically do this activity? Again, simple, we can make use of the option called vlookup. Let's understand how can we make use of it. Just for our understanding, I'll just hide this column called language so that it would be easier for us to understand. So now what I want is, this value needs to be searched in my other sheet, which is singers. And once there is a match in this name column, I want to get this ID. So in order for that to happen, what you need to do is, you need to have the value that needs to be populated towards the right hand side. If you are searching for name column and you want to populate ID in the vlookup, that is where this column that you wanted to populate in the first sheet should be towards your right hand side. In short, whatever that you wanted to replace, it should have a corresponding value. Think of this like a map. You have an ID and a value. You have a key and a value. Key and a value. So this is what I'm searching for, and this is the value that I want to replace. This is the value that I'm searching for. This is the value that I want to replace. Where do I want to replace them? I want to replace in the songs column or in the song sheet. So that is what we are trying to do. If you see here, there are multiple values. Singer 2 is here, singer 5 is there. That means I can use one formula to ask the system to basically search for this value in that sheet called singer and get that ID of that particular singer and paste it in this column called I, which is temporary singer. So how do you do it? Use the option called vlookup. In case if you want a visual representation of this particular vlookup, click on formula and then go to lookup and references, search for vlookup, and that is where you will get a visual representation. So what is the first value that you wanted to populate? Populate the value that you want to search for. So I want to search for singer 2 in which sheet is what it is asking. So once that is done, click on your second column. The second column which says table array basically talks about where do I search for this singer 2. That is where I need to give the sheet that I have already in place, which is singer. So this is the place where I'll get to know the value for that particular singer 2, which is my Salesforce ID. So I'll select the two columns E and F because E has the values that I wanted to search for and F is the value that I want to replace it with. So the singer 2 and its corresponding Salesforce ID. So once that is done, it would ask you for a column index. Since we are using two columns, put it as 2 and lookup range, put it as 0, indicating that we want an exact match. So once done, click on OK. So if you see here, I have got the ID of singer 2. So use the drag option so that way all the IDs of that particular columns would be populated. So for singer 5, it got an ID. And what we'll do, we'll again do the copy pasting so that way we get a value corresponding to this formula that we have written. So let's quickly check this out. So let's check for singer 6. Singer 6 ID that has been populated as small j and small b. Let's search for that in our other Excel sheet, which is singer, and see where exactly it is. So if you see here, for singer 6, this is the ID that we have got in our Excel sheet. This is how you can make use of your vlookup. Yes, vlookup seems to be a little confusing for people who have started, but understand the point that what is the value that you're searching for and where is the values that you can get from. Right? So if you have that clear-cut understanding, the vlookup formula seems to be easy. If you want to make use of the visual representation, go with this vlookup formula, or you can still stick with the first discussion that we had in our PPT, which basically goes like this. What is the value that you want to look for? In our case, we wanted to look for singer 2. And where do we want to look for this information? You wanted this value to be fetched from a singer CSV file that we have. And how many columns that we are using? We are using 2. And do we want an exact match or an approximate match? We can use either 0 or false value if you want an exact match. If you want approximate match, you can use 1 here. Do not use approximate option if you are dealing with this lookup IDs. We want an exact ID so that way we can map the right song object to the right singer record. That is how you can make use of your vlookup. And the last but not the least, we have a split column data. The split column is something that you might have already seen. This would basically help you split the data into multiple columns based on a identifier that you have. So let's see that in practice. So let's say if I go back to the same Excel sheet that I was using earlier for the user's record. So if this is the column that I have, and let's say if I want only the usernames here, I do not want @test.com.dev. I want only this values that I have, which is test123, test121, so on and so forth. So how do I do this operation? So in case if you want to split something, that is where you can select the column, go to your data tab, and that is where you would see an option called text to column. Right, so what it basically talks about is it splits a column to a text into multiple columns. So if I want the system to basically split this each and every cell into 2 columns, and the splitting criteria is this @. So if you want the system to basically split this text into 2 columns whenever there is an @ symbol, so that is where you can make use of your text to column option. I'm using @ for this example. You can make use of any other character also. So what you need to do, select the column, click on text to column, and if you see here, that is where the system is asking for two options. Either you can split it based on a delimiter, or you can do it with a fixed width. So if there is a width that is there in between the text information, it can also split based on it also. So once you select the delimiter option, in my case, I want to split it based on a character. So that is why I've selected it as a delimiter. Click on next. And if you see here, we can do it with a tab or with a semicolon or with a comma or with a space. Or if you want to specify a specific character, just in our case, which is @ I can do that also. All I need to do is check this checkbox, enter the delimiter character that I wanted to use. Right? If you see here, as soon as I do that, wherever there is an @ it is splitting into a second column. So this is how it would look like. You can check that before asking the system to do it. Once done, click on next and then click on finish. So if you see here, wherever there is an @ it is splitting that into a second column here. So that is the usage of your split. These are the 5 hacks that we wanted to share with you, which would reduce the effort that you put in terms of doing these exercises or prepping your data in your Excel sheet. Hope this video is helpful. In case if you want such tips and tricks on Excel sheet, do let us know and we will come back with the part 2 of this Excel sheet. Till then, happy Salesforce learning. If you have liked this video, do like, share, and subscribe to our channel, SFDC Quest. And do let us know in the comment section what you want us to come up with the next video as. That is all for now. Until we meet next time, bye for now. Hey guys, if you like this video, do like, share, and subscribe to SFDC Quest.